Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Making Milestones podcast. Today's podcast has a very special guest. I have invited Dr. Tomas Teskey to speak on the podcast. He's a veterinarian that specializes in hoof care, and we're going to talk about all things hoof care and whole horse health, as well as shoes versus barefoot and other sorts of things like that. I'm super excited to have him on the podcast. He's been a very outspoken proponent for barefoot horses and has also shared a lot of great information regarding that and made some changes in the industry in doing so. So thank you so much to Tomas for coming on this podcast, and I hope you all enjoy this discussion.
I am Dr. Teskey, Tomas Teskey. It's been 28 years since I graduated from Colorado State University, and I practiced in Arizona in a clinical equine environment for the first 10 years, and then after that I headed back to my family ranch and roots in central Arizona and started keeping horses instead of cows. That was my family has always kept more cows and had cow-calf operation, but I started keeping herds of horses where I really started to be able to, it felt like I had a living laboratory at that point where I could really watch some things. And that's when I really started to feel into the holistic possibilities with horse care. It was only 5 years out of school when I started to really question a lot of the hoof care and dental care and a lot of other things that I had learned with the Western veterinary medical approach, which was awesome for sure, but it also left me hanging in a lot of areas. So I really felt like I had to go back to school to learn some other things about hoof care and dental care. And so, boy, it seems like time flies. And now I finally wrote a book on what I think holistic horse care involves and put that out. And that's been well received, at least by people who are at least partially open to hearing that sort of thing. And but I'm happy to be here and just talk about where we're headed with all of this. It seems like we really have an opportunity here to direct where we're going.
100%. I think there's a lot of change that's on its way in the horse world, which is lovely, but there's still so much outdated stuff that I think leads to people rejecting information that is accurate and true just because it goes against like the popular grain. So I guess one of my first questions for you would be like pertaining to hoof care. Are there any areas that you view as like the biggest hurdles to overcome or the most common issues that you see in horses that need addressed, or anything like that?
Yeah. So that brings up for me probably the biggest reason or two that horses would not be comfortable on their own feet. We know that horses are born with a set of feet that would be fine on any terrain if they had the opportunity to develop and exercise and get strong on whatever terrain was being demanded of them. Mm-hmm. And I've proven this with all different kinds of breeds of horses and different kinds of terrain. And that really shined a light on the fact that one of the biggest challenges people have with pursuing natural hoof care is providing the other things that bring success. And that would be enough movement on a varied kind of terrain that would be stimulating and not too hard, not too soft, not too muddy, not too full of filth, or not being able to get dried out at least once in a while. So depending on where you live in the world, it can be more or less challenging to find the space and the climate that would help you be successful. Being in Europe this summer, I've really gotten to practice what I preach and build a track and get some gravel and get some sand and, basically make a habitat where, being in Arizona for all of my life, it was so easy, really. You can get a callus to form on a horse's foot literally within days.
Mm-hmm.
And here, where it's wetter, just much more challenging. So, there's things with trimming also that are important, but I wouldn't say that's at the top of the list.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know that horses that move enough trim their own feet and have the best feet. So therefore, no matter what your environment is, if you provide enough movement on some varied terrain, you win, and the horse wins, and they're happy and they're sure-footed. So that's what that brings up for me when you ask me about the hoof care part.
Yeah. And then I know you've talked a lot about on your pages about traditional horseshoes and how they can damage the hoof. So I also would want to ask you about that because from where I live, generally speaking, there are some farriers who are starting to do stuff differently, but most farriers still here are still using traditional steel open-heeled shoes, and it's far less common to see people using like frog support pads or using types of composite or rubber shoes in place of the steel shoes. So I just wanted to ask your thoughts on that.
Okay. Well, it reminds me of just having an evolving perspective. When we know better, we do better. And so what I've learned and what I've been able to focus on these years is how to be successful without using steel as a material next to a horse's body, in their foot or in their mouth or whatever. It's become abundantly clear to me that steel is an absolutely inappropriate material to put on a horse's foot because it antagonizes the normal form and function of that foundation of the horse. Now, you have to remember that many horses coming out of shoes probably, if you look in their eyes and look at their expressions, sometimes they're like, what the heck? I mean, because all of a sudden their foot begins to twist and move and flex, and some of them get actually a bit concerned but basically it awakens so much neurology and circulation and flow and sensation in the whole body that I think we underestimate how vital it is for earth connection and good feedback from the horse to the earth and back and forth. So we have better materials. Bottom line, we have much, much better materials that are dynamic and complement instead of antagonize normal hoof form and function.
Yeah, I find it interesting how common steel shoes still are, because even if you just think about it from like the perspective of a human, like you would never throw steel shoes on a person because you'd know that it would create more shock. So it's interesting to me how behind the horse world is on that. And like, I'm guilty of that too in previous years where I didn't see any problem with it. But then because of people like you reading your posts and other people who are talking about modernizing hoof care, it kind of was like a light bulb moment where I was like, oh, that totally makes sense. It's really weird to put a metal rigid structure on the foot of a 1,000-pound animal who's taking so much wear and tear on their legs every time they move, like when we're asking them to jump and all that. So it's super interesting to me to, be able to talk to you and hear you say all this, because it's something that I do think is so far behind. Leading up, that leads up to my next question, which is like, as a veterinarian, how correlated with hoof care and overall hoof health or hoof dysfunction do you think a lot of the soundness problems we see in horses are?
Wow. It's truly foundational, and thank you for that feedback on how it comes across, because I think that is important for, me with letters after my name, DVM, to be able to find the words to not only explain what's going on, but have it hopefully ring true enough for people that they would at least entertain the idea. So thanks for that. But what's happening with this is we have, and Western medicine is not as good at this as other Eastern types of medical influence that understands flow of energy and feedback mechanisms. But we are getting a much better picture with our diagnostics. Western medicine is developing some pretty cool machines that are going to be able to identify magnetic fields, energy flow. And so what's happening with horses that are unsound in their feet is it translates to a compensation. Think about it as a compensation or a bracing or a modification that they have to make with their posture to deal with something that doesn't feel quite secure enough, strong enough. Is it going to hold me? Can I blast off as fast as I want, or am I going to have to hold back because the feedback I'm getting is this is a lot of concussion, or this is some pain, or this is too much twist. But if the health was there, people would be so impressed and happy with, wow, I thought my horse was showing spirit and, a great expression of energy, but now this is so common, right? To people report that, wow, they've exceeded my expectations with what I thought was possible. And that's just the power of them having solid feet, no matter where the lameness is. Now, of course, most lameness is, statistically, from the fetlock down for sure. But no matter where the lameness is in a horse's body, if the hoof capsule in that foot is able to do its job with torquing and twisting and absorbing energy and dissipating it correctly with good circulation and neurology, the whole body is basically feeling better because you're not making the body do something it wasn't designed to do. So much of this force and energy was intended to be handled by solid hoof structure. And if it's not there, it's passing that responsibility to other anatomical regions in the body that's wear and tear on them that they weren't really designed to do. So it gets to be a fierce, vicious cycle if their feet aren't feeling good and aren't formed well.
That totally makes sense. Sorry, I'm just thinking of all the common topics that I see horse people bring up pertaining to hoof care. To oftentimes, I find that a lot of people feel helpless to help their horse transition to barefoot or know where to start. And there's also a lot of different problems that might arise when they're trying to transfer them into the type of holistic lifestyle that would promote good hoof care. So I guess the next question I would have is, for people who are struggling with laminitis with their horses, what are your thoughts on managing that in a realistic way in the modern environment? And I suppose, what would you suggest to horse owners who that's one of their concerns when they're trying to think of a new lifestyle for their horse and approach hoof care?
Mm-hmm. So specifically for laminitis, which is, often been just such a challenging problem depending on where you live in the world, with either a wet environment and or so many calories growing from the ground and the trees and everything. It's, to me, it's not so much all the calories. It's the fact that the animals are not utilizing those calories like they used to do. Because one thing we can realize pretty straightforwardly is the horses are no longer our transportation. They're not plowing the fields. They're not taking us back and forth to town. And this was every day. They were our vehicles. And so now we still want horses around, and they're in these similar areas, and it's just too much. So, if we sit on the couch and eat potato chips and, candy, or if we let our kids just overeat that all the time, that's going to be predictable with diabetes and obesity and metabolic problems. So what we have to come up with is not only realizing that that's the issue, but make spaces that are promoting movement without giving them all that free access to the highest sugar diet that they were getting. Now, I really like live food. I like horses that have access to grazing and different types of grass and brush and trees and chewing on this and that. And as long as you keep them moving back and forth from a water source to wherever you put your hay nets or your hay or wherever they go to graze, and then back and forth, and they have to cross some gravel on the way to and from there, you will not end up seeing their feet literally blow off the ends of their legs. To me, it's like watching all of this heat and metabolic craziness in their body literally blow their hoof capsules right off the ends of their legs. It's like this energy needs to be utilized, and we also need to increase the fiber and decrease the sugar that they're having to deal with, because they're not being asked to perform and work and plow and drive. And now there are people that do endurance and people that do ride their horses every day, and they aren't going to have near the challenge with keeping laminitis at bay, or because they are utilizing those calories and their horses are more fit. So we could really take a hint and really take a good clue from looking at the horses that are in these environments but not getting laminitic. They're the ones that are fit and exercised, played with a lot, and it doesn't have to be riding. You just stimulate movement. That's top of my list.
Cool. That's really good to know, because I think that's one of the primary concerns, I'd say, at least for people, especially in my area, because I live in a really wet climate here in the lower mainland of British Columbia. And then also I've heard a lot of people struggle with this in the UK, where they have really, really rich grass during the wet season. So that's something that I've heard a lot from people who are wanting to, or like as a kind of an excuse almost for not providing horses with adequate turnout. I've heard that brought up a lot. So it's really interesting to hear your perspective on it, because the movement is so important. And then we have, unfortunately, a lot of people who keep their horses stabled or in really small paddocks, and then don't necessarily go about transitioning them to summer pasture very well if the horse is like existing in a little paddock throughout the wet season, and then they just chuck them out on grass throughout the spring and summer. And then that can be used as an excuse to not provide the space the next time around. So it's super interesting to hear.
Yeah. We could all get a PhD in nutrition and still be learning something all the time. It's a fascinating subject, and learning about how to improve our soils, how to improve the diversity of the grasses that are more healthy out there. Because keep in mind, a lot of these original places are meant for production of milk or meat, or producing an animal product. And we just want to maintain our horses. We don't want to sell them by the kilo, like there's still some places in the world that do, but we're not interested in doing that. We want to maintain them for long lifespan. So let's look at what we can do to help our environment be conducive to that.
Then the next question I'd have too is also related to environment, because I know a lot of other people, like again, especially in like really wet areas, like where I live, and then also in the UK, with thrush. And I know that in my experience, at least, there isn't as much of an education on how damaging and painful it can be as there should be. Like growing up, from what I can recall with all the horses that I worked with, so many of them were thrushy, and we were just taught that it was how the hoof is supposed to normally look, and no one really dealt with it. Or when they waited until it got really bad, and then they would treat it with like copper tox or something. But what are your thoughts on like thrush treatment and prevention?
Okay. Yeah, it's a good point that you make, that we get used to seeing what we're seeing, and it kind of gets out of our mind's eye as to what we might expect otherwise or hope for. But there's definitely light at this end of this tunnel here, because I know how frustrating that can be to always have the smelly foot and the junk and the crud. And so what you need to do is just make sure your nutrition minerals are adequate, not excessive, not because certainly minerals can be at toxic levels too. But what I see more commonly is not enough copper, not enough zinc. Make sure selenium is. And how do you do this? You can either test your forage or your grass, or you can simply talk to people in your area that are aware of what that geographic area is like for the forage and what minerals are normally deficient or not. And then just supplement. It doesn't hurt to try a good vitamin mineral supplement. And a lot of times you improve the immune system and they're more resistant to infection. Then beyond that, environment again. Horses don't prefer to stand in filthy areas if they have some other comfortable places to be. Could be a sandy area, some gravelly area. Just make sure the gravel has some depth to it, so it's not like marbles on a hard surface. That's what we want. And then that travel back and forth to exfoliate. To imagine as they go around corners and race back and forth in the little track that you make, they're cleaning and exfoliating all of those cracks and crevices alongside the frog and the central sulcus. And then every once in a while, at least every few days, if not more often, clean it out, check it out, and see if there's anything that's hiding. When I teach trimming, I'm very, very strict about make sure we check the central sulcus, and make sure we check the white line of the bar back in the heel area there. And very important to not allow stuff to hide. But that's not going to be a problem with horses that are moving enough to polish the bottom of their feet. And so it's a cleaning action that they have simply by moving across these varied terrains again. And then as far as topical, say you have some cases you're trying to rehabilitate or get better, use a brush. Use like a kitchen floor brush or even a wire brush if they can handle it eventually to exfoliate and clean. And then vinegar, either white vinegar or apple cider vinegar is good because it's a low pH. It's more acidic, which bacteria and fungus don't get along with very well. That's why it's good for preserving food when we make pickles and stuff. So think about vinegar. Be careful with chemicals that would be harsh next to your skin or in your mouth, because some of these feet have wounds or the tissue is getting really, really close to a sensitive dermal interface, and some of these can be pretty caustic, pretty irritating. So that's why I prefer vinegar type of stuff, or your essential oils also. So many of you are really on top of it with mixtures of oils, whether it be tea tree oil or mixed with lavender or frankincense, or so many different cool combinations that are working in your area. So network with people who are using these kinds of things too, and it really helps.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That's so informative. And I was also just thinking of some of the articles that I've read from you that talk about like the atrophy of the hoof and how open-heeled metal shoes can contribute to that. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about that again too, because I find that that's something that a lot of horse people are in denial of, and they kind of start to view it as like a rabid barefooter mindset, where they think that people are just saying that like it's their way or the highway, like you should, like if you ever put your horse in shoes, you're horrible, rather than more of like a statement on the material and I guess shape of the shoes that we use nowadays. And that was good. Like your articles are some of the first ones that I have read on that. So I'd be really interested in hearing your perspective on that.
Okay. So for the most part, our domestic horses are toe strong and heel weak, which means that given their level of movement and quality of movement, not just that shuffling along like, oh, I'm bored in my environment. Oh, another day. I'm going to go get a drink. I'm going to eat my hay, or I'm going to wait for dinner to come. There's so many things that get boring. And so standing around, when horses are not moving, standing around, they're shifting weight towards their toes. That ends up, that kind of stimulation, even though it's kind of retarded stimulation, it makes for stronger toes and weaker heels. The way you build heels is with twist and torque and acceleration and movement and stop and go and turn, and just that animated, spirited movement that we love watching in horses. That's what builds heels. So I try to get people excited about the possibility, because we know that this can turn around. We just have so many case studies where we actually measure the size of the hoof, the width of the frog, the length of the frog, and we watch it just change over time and develop density and develop some just resilience, some good bounce. Like I teach people how to feel between the heel bulbs, that tissue, what we call the digital cushion, and how that responds to pressure. And when we first take shoes off, I say, okay, you watch this. And by the way, I don't start with people unless they want to give me 4 months. They have to agree to give me 4 months, rain or shine, to help them out and do as good a job as they can to do what I'm saying, what I'm recommending, because within 3 to 4 months, I can grow out a new heel that's stronger. That's growing because of the stimulation, because of using the boots and pads or the disinfection, getting the thrush out of there, getting a stronger heel. So to me, that is such a critical thing to get, not only the realization that the horses are heel weak, but we can actually measure it. So you talk about eye training for people, where you can show them videos of horses that are moving a certain way or reacting a certain way. And even with you in behavior, it's so apparent sometimes how much horses are able to handle. And then there's just like one more thing, and then just like have this big overwhelming reaction. You think, oh, what's wrong? It's like, well, it's just one more thing that it hurts, and it's too much. So this is where people really can get excited about moving up a level in animation performance. I show them how to measure and watch this change in form that happens in the back of their horse's feet, the increasing size of the frog and the density, and we follow that with pictures. They gotta send me pictures. I say, hey, it's time for pictures. Don't forget. And I have just laptops full of these case studies and these pictures showing these transformations, which it really keeps me going, because rehabilitation can often get depressing, but then I remember, well, it's going to get better. Just watch. And if they do what I say, they're very happy.
That's so good to know. And then kind of to piggyback off of that question, I would say, do you have like preferred like brands of hoof boots or types of shoes that, like, if people are going to shoe, or if their horse needs a little bit more protection during the hoof rehab journey, that you would recommend? Or even just like stylistically, if you don't have like specific brands, like what type of boot or shoe you like?
Yeah. I'm most familiar with some of the boots that are, they have the Velcro type attachments in the front, whether it's like the Cavallo type design that it's easy on and easy off, and it's a little more bulky, but what's nice about it is you can put a pad inside of it and it'll still hold the whole foot, and it's good for a beginner. And so many times these horses' feet are going to change shape and even change size. So we don't necessarily want to invest in the top of the line, form-fitting, ergonomically shaped hoof boot. maybe wait for at least 1 or 2 hoof cycles, wear out a couple of pairs of Cavallo type boots or Easy Care type boots that are a little bit more generically made and a little bit more, sized for a variation in length and width of hoof, and work with a trimmer who understands about fitting and preventing preventing rubbing, sores on heel bulbs. There's many good tricks out there using, whether it's powder or socks or a certain kind of pad or whatever, to avoid those sorts of problems. But later on, when you are looking at your much nicer looking foot and you take your measurements, now you can get something like a scoot boot or a Renegade or something that is just kind of going to stay more form-fitting, more sleek. People are even jumping and doing all sorts of performance activities with these boots, if they need them at all, of course, depending on the terrain and the situation. So that's what I would think would be good to start with. A little cheaper ones that aren't quite as custom, and then you can move towards a little bit more expensive. But these boots outlast. They pay for themselves for what it costs to shoe a horse. Oh my gosh, you're going to save a ton of money, and you only need them when you are going to go on your rides or on your performance runs or whatever. So it's much kinder and much nicer and much more healthy to go this route.
That's super good to know. And then with regards to if someone wanted to do shoes or glue on shoes or even nail on shoes as opposed to a hoof boot, are there any types of brands that you would recommend or certain types of shoes? Or would you have a definitive preference for glue on versus nail on and so on and so forth?
Yeah. So in Arizona, I've only needed to use a glue on type of shoe a few times simply because of low humidity, very dry. I can get a hoof to get more solid and more calloused very quickly. Now, being in Europe or visiting these other places in your part of the world or Georgia or Southeast Australia, places that are just so wet and things are really not drying out, I can see where a glue on would be the way to go, which is what I would prefer, because I don't want to drive nails into the hoof wall. That causes damage and allows bugs to invade, etc. So I would definitely be going with glue on, and that technology is pretty impressive. These stay on, and they're not coming off until a month or 6 weeks later or whatever, that you have to tear them off with the nippers. And of course, you're going to have to deal with some amount of smell and whatnot that can hide underneath these shoes sometimes. Some of them have a little bit of an open spot on the bottom that allows a little bit of air to circulate. Sometimes you need a full pad there because you're protecting the entire sole, and it's important to do that in some cases. So a lot of times we use medicinal clay like Artemud or other types of medicinal clay materials to basically occupy a space and have a little bit of disinfecting or antiseptic quality while that glue on is in place. But I would definitely say that my target is eventually to not have to use these. I would much rather use this as a way to get out of the rut, out of the hole that this horse is in rehabilitation wise. And if we're doing things correctly with diet and terrain, etc., the same things I keep talking about, then we're not going to have to use the glue-ons. Maybe endurance, things like that. Some people that just don't like messing with boots, I can kind of relate to that. They can kind of be a pain in the butt sometimes, but they are the best option, even better than glue-ons, because you can check the whole foot. You can check everything. Nothing can hide from you. And you can take them on and off, day to night to day to night. And So it's much more versatile to have a nice boot pad combination.
Super good to know. Thank you so much for all that information. And yeah, like I think there's so many like types of boots and like hoof like shoes and whatnot on the market that I think it's really overwhelming for some people to try to figure out which ones to get. Like I've trialed a bunch of the mainstream like hoof boot brands before I kind of settled down and decided which ones to get.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of it cost a lot of money first of all, and I was kind of overwhelmed, and like it was difficult to decide which was my favorite. And so it's nice to get, for like anyone to get like a little bit of insight on where they should kind of go about trying to start. One of the things too that I noticed with hoof boots that can be difficult is when horses have more oval shaped hooves in the beginning when they're adjusting. It can be difficult to find brands that will, like, especially really underrun heels. That was one of the problems that I kind of ran into with my gelding, because he had a super underrun hoof. And especially for avoiding heel rubs from the boot, like even if you can get their foot into the boot, it can be hard to avoid the rubs. So are there any like, I guess tips or tricks that you have, to, I guess, mitigate the risk of that?
Yeah. So with that type of hoof shape, that basically goes right back again to the toe strong, heel weak scenario, which how we're going to deal with that is taking toe length from the top as aggressively as we can over time. And you have to, be respectful to start with, but before long, you're going to be basically pushing that toe back so that foot gets back underneath that horse and not so run forward with that underrun conformation. So we're working on the shape. We're getting it more round. We're getting it to stand up. That's how we're rehabilitating the heel also, because as soon as we take toe back, we're asking the heel to do a little bit more work. And as long as it's not too much, it's going to start to build and respond. And then with some of these underrun, think about getting a wedge pad out of a neoprene or closed cell foam type of pad. And what I like to do is buy just a cheap neoprene saddle pad or foam saddle pad, because when you buy individual hoof boot pads, you spend all this money per pair, and the horses kind of smash them down, and you have to change them after a couple of weeks sometimes. So just look for some cheap saddle pad or other type padding material in the Home Depot or building store type, whatever you have. Might find some materials that what you want is some bounce. Just when you're feeling these pads, just squish them with your fingers and feel if it bounces. You don't want necessarily like the memory foam type stuff. You want something that will bounce back, because that's a give and release stimulation to the whole bottom of the foot. But you can cut these and make these into wedges to put the thicker wedge towards the heel for the underrun, for the smashed heel, the heels you're trying to rehabilitate, get them up a little bit. And it's dynamic. That's the beauty of it. You're not using, a 3-degree plastic pad with a KB aluminum egg bar shoe that's not dynamic. It's too rigid. It's not allowing the torque and the flex. That's the beauty of just using these bouncing dynamic materials. So you can use that wedge back there, and then use medicated hoof powder in your boots, like a Gold Bond or like a good baby powder, talcum type powder, because it'll absorb some moisture and it'll prevent sores a lot of times from developing on heel bulbs. And then don't get complacent and not check at least once a day when you're in rehabilitation or you're going on a ride. Those boots come off when you get home, or if they're having to be in boots for, first few days or weeks after coming out of shoes, then make sure you check it every day. Let it air out. Just let them stand in a comfortable place. Make a padded area. They can stand. And, get the things to dry out, brush everything off, clean, disinfect if you need to, reapply your hoof powder after things are dry, use a sock if you have to. There's so many good ideas on so many of these websites now. I could talk to you for days and days about all these things, but that's a couple things that come to mind on that.
That's so good to hear. Like, yeah, you've given so much amazing advice. I think that's really great. Do you have any parting words or anything that you'd like to kind of leave with the podcast before we finish up? Because we're nearing the 45-minute mark now. So is there anything that you think is important to like leave with people, or that you'd like to kind of, I guess, pass on to listeners to help them with like their hoof care journey and just any type of holistic horse care?
Wow. That's the best question ever. I would like people to know that I care about their process. I want to support them in their process. This is important stuff. This is beyond just what we're doing with improving horse welfare, horse care, a holistic mindset. But with what you're doing and what your clients are trying to learn and trying to do better by receiving this education, being open to this type of education and set of ideas, this is just pure gold to me. This really lights a fire in me to keep going and stay in touch with people who really want to pursue this, because we really are coming up against, maybe not against, we're coming into, imagine, a waveform that's going to be amplified, and we want to ride this wave. We don't want to get crashed by it and pushed down into the surf. We want to ride this wave that's coming to improve welfare, improve horse care, and lead by example. This is the most powerful thing we can do. No matter what the naysayers are saying, no matter who's going to tease you about your orange hoof boots. No, you just focus on how this is improving health, improving form and function, and you are honoring the nature of the horse, and you're honoring yourself, which you feel is right. You feel this. You know that there's something important here, and this is going to help us all out. So everybody wins: the horses, the people, the environment, our earth. It's important that we all stay in good communication about this. So I'm here to support, and I love getting messages and pictures, and I eventually get to them all still. Maybe there'll be a day when I can't, but I do like visiting with you guys, and I hope we can still learn something every day.
Thank you so much. And then do you have any pages that you like people can follow you on, that you'd like to share? And then also the name of the book that you wrote or anything like that you'd like to leave in case people want to look up more of your work?
Oh yeah, thank you. So last name is spelled T as in Tom, E-S-K-E-Y, Teskey. And you can find my website, Insight to Equus, E-Q-U-U-S, equus.com. And that's where the book is that I wrote. It's 260 some pages, full color. I've got spiral and hardbound. I'll ship it anywhere in the world to you. It's self-published. It's kind of my life's work. I put the best of the best stuff in there for you to look at and digest, and some funny stuff, some stories, some technical stuff, some statistics, all kinds of stuff for whatever you might be interested in. And on Facebook, Tomas Teskey Veterinary Insights. You can find my page where I post little videos or little things, which I hope to do more of. And so that's the main website and Facebook page. And get a copy of the book if you resonate with some of this stuff that I'm saying, because we just basically touching the tip of the proverbial iceberg here. It's worth checking out. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's great. That's so much amazing information. I'm sure a lot of people will be interested in checking out your book and then also some of the other stuff that you post on Facebook, because there's a lot of great information that I've seen on your Facebook pages too that has really resonated with me. So yeah, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast and being so willing to share your expertise. I think it'll be really great for people to see a different perspective because there's so few people in the horse industry that are going about things the way that you are. So it's always a privilege to be able to hear from people such as yourself.
Oh, thanks a lot, Shelby. It was a privilege to be here, and I hope other veterinary medical professionals can find their voice with all of this as well.
Yeah, I hope so too. And I think change is coming just slowly, but hopefully it'll start speeding up as time goes on. But
Yes.
yeah, thank you so much and have a great day. I hope everyone enjoyed that discussion. And once again, I'm really thankful for Dr. Teskey for coming on the podcast to speak with me. It was super interesting and informative. For anyone who is interested in ways that they can help support the podcast, you can check out my online store where I sell equestrian apparel and horse bridles at shopmilestoneeq.com. That's shopmilestoneeq.com, or you can subscribe to my Patreon at patreon.com/SDEquus. That's SDEQUUS. I also have options on PayPal to send tips or do one-time donations to help support the podcast since I don't put ads on this podcast. That's really the only way I make any revenue from the podcast, and I love doing these things, so I appreciate any and all support of my work and endeavors. Also, the next podcast that I'll be posting after this one is going to be a recap of my time in Paris at the Horse Welfare Conference that was hosted by Collectif pour les Chevaux, where we talked about hyperflexion and the risk factors associated with that, and even had FEI officials invited to speak on that topic as well. So that'll be coming up next for anyone who's interested in that, but I wanted to share this one first because it's been quite delayed in getting up. So anyways, thank you everyone for listening, and stay tuned for the next podcast, and check out the links in the description of this podcast if you're interested in supporting me in any way. Thanks everyone. Have a great day.